Ruth Ellery stepped down off the Burlington train into Corliss, Nebraska, in a gray wool dress a full size too large for her, and boots that had been resoled twice. The hem had been let out and taken in so many times you could read the history of it in the stitching. A boardwife named Mrs. Pruitt was waiting on the platform with a folded charity coat over her arm, and she pressed it forward the moment Ruth's foot touched the boards. "For the poor teacher," she said, loud enough that the crowd could hear her kindness. Ruth thanked her. She did not take the coat. And she did not color. The chairman of the school board, Horace Denniston, stood among the depot crowd. The 9 of the board and half the town had come to look at what $32 a month had bought them. He looked her up and down, the dress, the boots, the plain bag, and he said, in front of everyone, $32 a month, and she looks it. A few people laughed. The boarding house would give her the cold north room over the kitchen and think itself generous for that. But she carried her own trunk off the platform. A heavy, iron-banded thing, locked, and she let no porter lay a hand on it. She set it down herself, and she stood square to the noise of the engine as it let off steam, weight settled through both feet. Before she seemed to notice she'd done it. And months on, a man would step off that same train in March with a folded handbill tucked inside his coat. But that is later. That is the trunk and the paper I am promising you now and handing you nothing of yet. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have looked closer, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this find something true in you, subscribe and stay to the end, because the end is the whole of it. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? I like to know who's out there in the dark, listening. Now, back to Corliss, and the cheapest teacher the town had ever hired. The board had gone down the list of applicants the winter before, and they had gone down it looking at one number only. Ruth Ellery had asked for the least of any name on the page. $32 a month, a term running to May, room and board found where she could. The other candidates wanted 40, 45. One bold woman from Lincoln wanted 50, and a stove of her own. The board hired the cheap one and went home pleased. All that winter and into the spring, whenever the subject of money came up at the general store or in the back pew after service, some man of the board would mention the teacher's salary the way another man might mention a good horse bought under price. They had been thrifty. They had been shrewd. They congratulated themselves for 4 straight months. And Ruth let them. She boarded, as promised, in the north room over the kitchen at the Halloran house, a room that never got the morning sun and never quite lost the smell of grease. She kept it bare. A narrow bed, a chair, a washstand, a row of pegs. The iron-banded trunk sat at the foot of the bed, and it was always locked. She walked the 2 miles out to the schoolhouse every morning in the dark, and she walked the 2 miles back every evening in the dark, and in between she taught the children of Corliss their letters and their sums with a patience that never once cracked into temper. She had the stove lit before the first child came through the door. That was the thing the mothers noticed first, if they noticed anything. On the coldest mornings, the little ones would arrive with frost on their scarves and find the room already warm, the fire already settled to a steady red, and Miss Ellery at the front with the day's words already chalked up clean on the board. She drilled spelling without ever raising her voice. She had a way of waiting. A child would stumble on a word, and she would not fill it in for him, and she would not scold. She would just wait, quiet and certain, until the child found it himself, and when he found it, she'd give a small nod and move on. There was a boy named Tom Renfrew in the back row who could not find much of anything yet. But I'll come to Tom. What none of them thought to ask was why. Why a grown woman, plainly educated, plainly capable, had come all the way out to the smallest stop on the Burlington line to teach farm children for the lowest wage the board could find. They assumed poverty, and poverty explained everything to their satisfaction. A poor woman takes what she can get. That was the whole of the story as Corliss understood it, and Ruth, who could have told them a truer story, chose the smaller one on purpose. She had chosen the smallest town on the line the same way, on purpose. Because she was not looking to be seen. She was looking to be near something, and near it quietly, and quiet was the one thing a small poor life could reliably buy. The first board meeting she attended was in the back room of the church, on a cold evening near the end of her first week. The 9 men sat along a plank table, and Ruth sat at the foot of it with her hands folded in her lap. Deniston opened a ledger and read the terms of her contract aloud for the benefit of the room, though every man there already knew them. Miss Ellery, $32 per month. Term to the 1st of May. Board found by the teacher. He read the number the way a preacher reads a favorite verse. He wanted them all to hear it again, to taste the economy of it. He looked down the table at her and asked, not unkindly, but not kindly either, whether she found the terms agreeable. "I do," Ruth said. And nothing more. It was near the end of that meeting that the first small thing showed itself, though only one person in the room might have caught it, and no one did. Ruth had been asked to write out the roll of children she'd taken on, so the board would have it for their records. Deniston pushed a stub of chalk and a slate across the table to her. She took the chalk in her right hand, and as she began to write the names, her sleeve rode back an inch from her wrist, and the lamplight caught the side of her right forefinger. There was a callus there, not the soft ink-stained callus of a person who writes. A hard, shining pad of skin along the inside of the first joint, the kind of thing leaves when it is pressed the same way, in the same place. 10,000 times. She felt the light on it, and without any hurry at all, she shifted her grip and folded the finger under, and finished the names with the callus hidden against her palm. Deniston took the slate back and never looked at her hand. Mrs. Halloran, who kept the boarding house, was the one who first remarked on the trunk. She said it to the other women at the store, the way a landlady will trade the small mysteries of her lodgers for a moment's interest. "She carries that trunk herself, Mrs. Halloran said. Won't let Jim so much as tip it up the stairs. And she keeps it locked. Locked in her own room, mind, with the door shut behind her." The women made the sounds women make. And when Mrs. Halloran, greatly daring, had asked her lodger one evening what she kept in it that was so precious, Ruth had answered her plainly and without a flicker. "My father's things," she'd said. That was all. My father's things. And Mrs. Halloran, who'd hoped for something better, had to make do with that. There was one other moment in those early weeks, and it went the way the callus went, seen by no one, meaning nothing to a town that wasn't looking. Ruth was in the store, at the counter, settling the small account she kept there for chalk and paper and a little tea. Behind her, near the door, a stack of empty crates went over all at once with a crash that startled the whole room. Every soul in the store jumped and turned toward the sound the way people do, chins first, bodies following, off balance and blinking. Every soul but one. Ruth turned toward the sound too. But she turned all of a piece, squared to it, both feet under her, her weight already dropped and settled, her hands come open and loose at her sides, and her eyes going flat and level and quick across the whole width of the room in a single sweep, the way you look for the source of a thing you mean to answer. It lasted less than a breath. Then a crate rolled harmlessly to a stop, and a boy laughed, and Ruth's shoulders came down, and she turned back to her tea. Nobody had watched her do it. If they had, they would not have known what they were looking at. But they would have felt, for just that half second, that the poor teacher had stood in that room like a person who had once been shot at and had not run. Now, the town's kindness, when it came, was worse than its scorn. It came in the middle of Ruth's second month on a raw morning, and it came in the form of a bundle. The Ladies' Aid Society had met and discussed the teacher's situation with a great deal of feeling. Here was a respectable young woman, educated, doing the Lord's own work with the children, and going about in a dress a size too big, and boots twice resoled. It would not do. It reflected on the town. So the ladies gathered up what they could spare. A dress here, a good shawl there, a pair of boots barely worn, a coat, a bonnet, and they made a neat bundle of it, and they tied it with string, and they carried it out along the 2-mile road and left it on the schoolhouse step where she could not miss it. They pinned a note to the top. For Miss Ellery's dignity. Ruth found it when she came out at noon to ring the children in. She stood a moment on the step, looking down at the bundle, the wind pulling at the pinned note. Then she picked it up, carried it inside, and set it on the corner of her own desk. At the end of the day, alone in the emptied schoolroom, with the light going gold and low through the west windows, she untied the string. She went through the clothes one by one, folding each thing carefully, respectfully, the way you handle what was given in kindness, even when the kindness cut. There was one dress among them, a dark blue wool, plainly the best of the lot, hardly worn. The sort of dress that would have fit her and warmed her and quieted the whole town's opinion of her in an afternoon. She took a single nail from the wall by the door where the children hung their coats. She hung the blue dress on it, and she left it there. Unworn, she could have put it on the next morning and been comfortable and been thought sensible. Instead, she went on in the gray wool, a size too large, and the town, seeing the good dress hanging untouched on its nail day after day through the schoolroom window, drew the only conclusion it knew how to draw. The teacher was too proud, or too broken, or too simple to help herself. Charity was her natural weather. They stopped wondering about her almost entirely after that, which was, though not one of them could have guessed it, precisely the thing she had hung the dress up to buy. Because here is the truth of why Ruth Ellery had come to Corliss, and it had nothing to do with a wage. The winter before, in another town 200 miles east, her only sister had died. Sarah had married a plain, hard-working man named Renfrew and borne him 2 children, a girl and a boy, and then a fever had taken Sarah in 3 days in the dead of January and left the children motherless. Their father had gone under the winter before that, so the 2 of them, Etta and Tom, had passed to the care of their father's brother, an overburdened man named John Renfrew, who farmed poor ground outside Corliss and already had mouths of his own to feed. He was not cruel. He was only tired and stretched thin, and there was not enough of him to go around. The children were fed and clothed, and largely left to raise themselves in the gaps. Ruth had a claim to them. By blood she was their aunt, their mother's own sister, and there were people who would have said she had every right to arrive and announce herself and try to take them in. But Ruth could not afford to make a claim. Not that claim, nor any claim, nor to stand up anywhere and be named and known and written down in a public record where a certain man might read it. So she had done the only thing left to a woman in her position. She had made herself small. She had taken the teacher's post in the very town where her sister's children were being raised, under a name that was hers but was not her whole name, for the lowest wage on offer, and she had come to be near them. Just near. To see them every day across a schoolroom. To feed the boy's mind if she could not feed him at her own table. To watch the girl grow. To be, without their ever knowing it, the last thread of their mother still tied to them in the world. She would take no credit and make no claim and ask for nothing, and in exchange the world would leave her be. Tom Renfrew was the boy in the back row who could not read. He was 7, small for it, quick to laugh and quick to give up, and letters swam on the page in front of him like fish he could not catch. The other children had learned to read past him, and he had learned to sit low in his seat and hope not to be called. Ruth never called on him in front of the others to shame him. But she began, quietly, to keep him after. 10 minutes at the end of the day, no more, when the room had emptied and the light was long. She would sit beside him, not across from him, and put her finger under one word at a time and wait, in that patient way of hers, while he fought it out. She never told him he was slow. She told him, once, that her own reading had come to her late and hard, and that the ones it comes hard to are often the ones who hold it best in the end. Whether that was true of her or only kind of her, the boy believed it, and he began to try. And Etta, his older sister, taking her cue from the teacher, stopped rolling her eyes at him across the yard. It was on an evening in that same stretch, alone in the north room over the kitchen with the door shut and the house quiet below her, that Ruth did the thing she did perhaps once a month. No more. She knelt at the foot of the bed. She took a small key from a cord around her neck, a key that never left her, warm from lying against her skin. And she unlocked the iron-banded trunk. She lifted the lid slow. On top were the things a poor woman would have: folded linen, a shawl, a small worn Bible with a name written inside the cover that was not the name Corliss knew her by. She set those aside with care. And underneath, wrapped in oiled cloth, were her father's things. There was a long flat case, hard leather gone soft at the corners with handling, and when she opened its brass catches there lay a rifle inside on a bed of green felt worn to the nap, a fine, slim, beautiful thing, the wood dark with oil and the metal kept bright, cared for the way you care for the one object in the world that is truly yours. And beside the case, nested in a fold of cloth, was a single ball of amber-colored glass, about the size of a small apple, hollow and light, the kind of glass ball a showman tosses spinning into the air for a marksman to break. It caught the lamplight and held it, a small trapped sun in the palm of her hand. She held the amber ball a while in the dark. She did not weep over it. She was long past that. She only held it, and turned it, and let the lamp move gold inside it, remembering. And then she wrapped it away again, and closed the case, and shut the lid, and turned the key. And she lay down in the cold north room and slept, the teacher who owned nothing, with everything she was locked in a box at the foot of her bed. Winter loosened. The road thawed to mud and then began to dry, and the light came earlier, and the children came to school without frost on their scarves. Tom Renfrew, by the middle of March, had read a whole page aloud, slowly, without help, and had looked up at the end of it with an expression Ruth kept for herself, and did not show him, because it would have embarrassed them both. Things were, for a little while, as near to peace as her life had come in 2 years. And then, at noon recess on an ordinary day, the thing happened that undid her. The boys were at the far fence, throwing stones at a post. It was a game they played whenever the ground was dry: line up along a chalk scratch and see who could hit the gray weathered fence post square from 20 paces. There was a great deal of noise about it, boasting and jeering, the way of boys. Tom was down at the end of the line, last as usual, and when his turn came he heaved his stone with his whole small body, and his arm went wild, and the stones sailed a yard wide, and the bigger boys laughed. He threw again. Wide again. His face was going red and tight in the way that comes just before a boy either fights or cries. Ruth had come out to the step to ring them in. She saw the boy's face, and something in her moved before her judgment could catch it and hold it down. She crossed the yard. She knelt in the dirt beside Tom, down at his level, and she paid no mind at all to the other boys or to whether anyone was watching. Which was, for a woman who had spent 2 years minding exactly that, the one unguarded moment of her life in Corliss. She picked up a stone and put it in his hand and closed his fingers around it. She did not tell him to try harder. She set her hand light on his right elbow and lifted it a few inches, and she pressed his hip and turned it a quarter, so his body came square to the post the way a door comes square to its frame. "Don't look at your hand," she said, low, just for him. "Look at the post. Only the post. Breathe out. And when you've let it all out, let go." Tom breathed out. He let go. The stone crossed the yard flat and quick and true and struck the fence post dead in the center with a crack that carried clean across the whole schoolyard, and the post rocked back on its buried heel, and for a second every boy on that chalk line stood with his mouth open. Tom stared at the post. Then He turned and stared up at her. This small teacher in her gray too-large dress, kneeling in the dirt with her hand still resting where his elbow had been. Across the yard, at the corner of the schoolhouse, a man named Amos Kerr had been down on one knee mending a sagging hinge on the yard gate. He was the town's gunsmith, an old man with slow, careful hands, and he had been half listening to the boys the way you half listen to weather. He had watched the whole of it. The kneel, the elbow, the quarter turn of the hip. The 3 words, breathe out, let go. And the stone going home dead center on a boy who could not have hit that post in 100 tries on his own. Amos Kerr did not move. His hand had stopped on the hinge. He knelt there by the gate with the screwdriver forgotten in his fingers, and he looked at the schoolteacher kneeling in the dirt, and something very old and very specific was turning over behind his eyes. Because Amos Kerr, 40 years back and 1,000 miles west of here, had paid good money more than once to sit in a canvas grandstand under torchlight and watch a marksman correct a shooter exactly that way. The elbow, the hip, the breath, before putting a ball through a spinning target at 40 yards from the back of a running horse. He knew that correction. He had seen it done by the finest shots alive. He had never once expected to see it done in a Nebraska schoolyard by a $32 teacher in mended boots, kneeling in the mud beside a farm boy, without a word of fuss, as though it were the most natural thing in the world for her hands to do. The noon bell had not rung. The boys were beginning to shout again, crowding around Tom, and Tom was laughing now, and none of them had seen a thing but a lucky throw. Ruth was already rising to her feet, brushing the dirt from her skirt, her face closing back over into its ordinary quiet, the moment folding itself away the way she folded everything away. She did not yet know she had been seen. She reached for the bell rope by the step. But across the yard the old gunsmith was still kneeling by the gate, not moving, watching her, and in his stilled face was the first crack in 4 months of her careful, hard-bought smallness. One man in the town of Corliss who had just watched the poor teacher give herself completely away, and who was already, quietly, beginning to wonder exactly who it was that had come to live among them under a borrowed dress and a name that only went halfway. He did not say anything that day, not to Ruth and not to anyone else. He finished the hinge, gathered his tools, and walked back up the main street to his shop with the particular careful quiet of a man who has learned over many years that the things worth knowing are rarely improved by being spoken aloud too soon. But he started watching. It was subtle enough that Ruth, careful as she was, did not catch it for a while. A man who repaired firearms for a living had reasons to pass the schoolhouse. He had reasons to stop at the fence. He had reasons, in a town that small, to be in most places where most people were, and he moved through Corliss with the unhurried authority of someone who had been a fixture of the place since before half its residents were born. Nobody remarked on Amos Kerr standing still with his hands in his coat pockets, watching the yard. Nobody remarked on much that Amos Kerr did. What he saw over the following weeks did not reassure him. He saw how she stood at the schoolhouse door in the morning, weight slightly forward, heels not quite settled, the stance of someone who has spent a great deal of time outdoors and in motion, not behind a desk. He saw how she moved down the center aisle of the general store, tracking the room without appearing to look at it, taking in exits and angles the way you did when you had worked crowds. He saw her hands when she carried the water bucket from the pump, loose at the wrist, easy, no wasted grip, and he thought about the particular economy of motion that came from a life spent handling things that required steadiness and nothing extra. Once, in February, a horse spooked outside the millinery and knocked over a stack of barrels in the street, a crashing, rolling noise that sent 3 women clutching at each other. Ruth, 30 feet away, turned toward it. Turned square, both feet weight settled low and forward before she had taken a breath. Then, she caught herself and turned it into a step, a hand on Mrs. Holt's arm. "Are you all right, Mrs. Holt? What a fright." But Kerr, from the other side of the street, had seen the first half of the turn. The half before the thinking started. He kept it to himself. March came in cold and gray, the way March always did on the plains, with a wind that found every crack in every building and made the stovepipes sing. The Burlington train was 2 days late on its first run of the month, and when it finally rolled in behind a wall of steam on a Thursday afternoon, Kerr was at the depot for a shipment of barrel stock he had been waiting on since January. He collected his crate, signed the manifest, and was loading the wagon when the passenger car doors opened, and a man stepped down onto the platform he had never seen before. The man was neither young nor old. He wore a city coat, carried a single leather bag, and stood for a moment on the platform looking at the town the way a person looked when they were confirming that a place was as small as they had expected it to be. Then he reached into his coat and unfolded something, a piece of paper, printed, creased from much handling, and stood in the cold air reading it. Though from the angle of his head and the stillness of his eyes, Kerr had the impression he was not reading so much as remembering. The depot agent came out for the mailbag. The man asked him something. The agent looked at the paper, looked at the man, looked at the paper again. Kerr finished tying down the crate. He did not go over. He drove back up the street at the same pace he always drove, and stopped the wagon in front of the harness shop and sat there in the cold for a long moment with the reins loose in his hands, looking at nothing in particular. Then he thought about the schoolteacher in her mended boots and the trunk she kept locked, and the way her hand had moved a boy's elbow without hesitation in a Nebraska schoolyard, and he thought, not yet. Not yet. But soon. He went inside and put the kettle on, and waited. The kettle sang, and Kerr let it. He sat with his hands flat on the table and thought about what a man carried a printed bill for, all this way, into a town that had nothing worth the fare. The next morning, he had his answer. The man came into the harness shop with the paper already unfolded. He was polite. He asked after the schoolteacher by a name that was not Ellery. He said it plain, the way a man says a thing he has said in a dozen towns already. Della Vance. He watched Kerr's face when he said it, the way a card player watches the turn. Kerr gave him nothing. He was old, and old men are good at giving nothing. Don't know the name, Kerr said. The man laid the bill on the counter and smoothed it with 2 fingers. It was a show bill, printed in 3 colors, worn soft at the folds. A woman on a rearing horse. A rifle at her shoulder. Above her, in letters a foot tall on the original and small now on this cheap reprint, it read, Della Vance, the girl who never missed. And under that, Vance's Grand Western Exhibition. 11,000 a night. Fine likeness, Kerr said. Long time ago, by the look of the paper. 4 years. The man refolded it. You'd remember the face. I remember a lot of faces. Comes with the trade. The man thanked him and left, and Kerr stood at the counter a while after the bell had stopped ringing over the door. Then he took down his coat, Everett Renner. That was the name he gave at the store, and at the depot, and to Mrs. Pruitt on the boardwalk, who told 2 others before noon. He was not a rude man. That was the danger in him. He asked his questions gently, and he let people fill the quiet themselves, and by the end of the day half of Corliss had turned the word Vance over in its mouth and found it strange and interesting. At the mercantile, Renner spread the bill on the counter for the storekeeper the way a man shows a wound. He said the woman on it had run off from a lawful home. He said there was paper on her, real paper, with a date and a seal. He said it low, so it would travel far. It traveled far. Ruth heard the name the way you hear a horse's hoof on ice, a half second before it slips. She was at the counter of that same store, 2 days on, adding a column of figures in the storekeeper's ledger, doing it for him because he trusted her hand better than his own. A woman behind her said it to another woman. Said the stranger's word. Vance. Ruth's pencil stopped. It was not a large thing. Her hand simply stopped on the ledger, the point resting on the paper. and did not move for the length of a breath. Then it moved again, and the column came out right, and she thanked the storekeeper and folded her scarf and went out into the cold. No one saw it but Kerr, who was across the street in his doorway and had been watching the store since morning. He waited until dark. Then he walked the 2 miles of frozen road out toward nothing, cut back, and came to the Halloran house from the kitchen side, where the light was. She opened the door with the lamp in her hand and knew him at once, though they had spoken maybe 4 times in 4 months. Mr. Kerr, Miss Ellery. He turned his hat in his hands. I'll be brief, and then I'll go. And you can decide I'm a foolish old man if you like. There's a man in town asking after a woman named Vance. He's got a bill and he's got a paper. He's been to the store and the depot and the Pruitts. I thought you should hear it from someone who wasn't enjoying the telling. Her face did not change. That, more than anything, told him he was right. That's kind of you, she said. I don't know the name. No, Kerr said. I expect you don't. He put his hat on. I watched a good many shows in my time, before I came out here. Saw more shooting than most men see in 10 lives. I know a corrected aim when it walks past me in a schoolyard. He said it without weight, the way you set down a thing you don't mean to pick up again. Whatever's true, I've no use for that man's business. I only wanted you to have the night's warning instead of the morning's surprise. Good evening. He went down the step into the dark, and she stood in the doorway with the lamp until she could no longer hear his boots, and then a while longer. That night the trunk stayed locked, but she took the key from around her neck and held it in her fist until the metal was warm as skin. It was near a thing, that week. A lodger new to the house, a drummer selling clock parts, found the north room door ajar while Ruth was at the school, and being an idle man he wandered in, and set his hand on the lid of the iron-banded trunk and lifted. It did not give. He rattled it once, twice, and Mrs. Halloran came up the stairs with her broom and her opinion and ran him back to his own room. And that was all. But it was near. Ruth came home to a trunk pulled a hand's width from the wall, and she pushed it back, and she did not sleep. Renner did not go away. He was a patient man, and he had a paper with 30 days written on it, and he meant to serve it in front of witnesses so that no one could later say it was not done. He learned that the town held a spring social at the schoolhouse on the first mild Saturday. He learned that the whole board would be there, all 9, and half the county besides. He decided to wait for that. The first mild Saturday came in the last week of April, warm enough at last that the yard mud had dried to a crust and the children could run on it. The women brought pies and the men brought a barrel and someone brought a fiddle. Ruth had strung the schoolroom with paper chains the children had made, and she stood at the edge of it all in her gray dress a size too large, letting the day belong to the town. Tom Renfrew had read a whole page aloud that week without stopping, and she was full of that, and nothing else. Denniston was in his good coat, holding court by the barrel, telling the story he liked best, which was the story of his own thrift. $32 a month, he was saying, and look what it bought. A tidy school and a quiet woman, and no trouble in it. Some towns pay $60 and get grief. We paid what the work was worth. That was when Renner came through the gate. He did not hurry. He walked to the middle of the yard where the ground was open and the light was good, and he took out the bill, and he unfolded it slowly so that the color of it caught the eye, and he held it up. "I'm looking for a woman," he said, loud, in the flat, carrying voice of a man who has done this before. This woman. The fiddle stopped. The yard turned. Her name is Della Vance. He turned the bill so the near rows could see the rearing horse, the lifted rifle, the girl who never missed. She rode in her father's show. She could put a ball through a playing card at 40 yards, and there are 11,000 people a night who'll swear to it. He let that sit. Then he took out the second paper, the folded legal one with its date and its seal, and his voice changed, went dry and official. And she is named on this. A lawful claim, filed and true, by the man whose roof she left. I'm here to put it in her hand." He looked, slowly, around the ring of faces. "She's standing in this yard." No one breathed. And then, because a crowd cannot help itself, 100 eyes went at once to the same place, to the gray dress at the edge of the yard, to the schoolteacher in her mended boots, because some part of every one of them had always known she did not quite fit the smallness they had assigned her. Ruth did not run. She had thought, over 4 months, about what she would do in this exact minute, and she found now that all the plans were gone, and there was only the thing itself. She stood very straight. She did not reach for the dress at her collar. She did not color, the way she had not colored on the platform in October when a woman tried to give her a coat. Deniston's face had gone the deep red of a man betrayed by his own bargain. He stepped forward, and his voice came out too loud, chasing the humiliation of it. "Is this true? Miss Ellery, is this true?" And before she could answer, he had already turned to the board members clustered by the door, already fitting the disaster into a shape he could survive. "The board will convene this afternoon." Today, he pointed at the bill as if it were a snake in the grass. "We can't keep a woman off a handbill in front of our children. We can't." "Whose children?" said a voice. "And how would you know what's fit for them?" Amos Kerr came out of the crowd. He was not a large man, and he was not a young one, and he came out slow, with his hat in his hand, and the yard gave way to him, because he had shod their horses and mended their guns for 20 years, and never once raised his voice. And a quiet man speaking up is a thing a crowd will always stop for. "I'll tell you what's on that bill," Kerr said. "Because I saw it, and near everyone here did not." He turned to Renner, but he spoke to the town. "I watched Vance's exhibition 3 times, 40 years back and then twice more when it came up the river. That woman on the paper, the one this man says is nobody, this cheap teacher you all got such a fine deal on. She put a rifle ball through the ace of spades at 40 yards from the back of a moving horse, in front of 11,000 people a night, and she did it every night, and she did not miss." He looked at Deniston. "Tell me again," she looks it. "Tell me again what $32 bought." Deniston opened his mouth and shut it. Renner smiled. Thin, a pretty speech. "It proves my paper, old man. She's the woman." "That's all I need," said. "No," Kerr said. "It proves half your paper. And the half it proves isn't the half that's yours." He turned to Ruth then, and his voice gentled, and he asked her the thing he had come across the yard to ask. "I'm not asking you to win anything, Miss Ellery. I'm asking you to prove one true thing in front of witnesses, so no man's paper can speak for you again. Will you show them once?" For a long moment she did not move. She looked at the children, at Etta near the door with her hand over her mouth, at Tom in the front of the crowd staring up at his teacher with a face full of a thing he could not name. She looked at the man with the folded claim. And something in her that had bent itself small for 4 months, that had bent small for 4 years, stood up to its full height. "Fetch me the trunk," she said. Etta knows the room. They brought it on a handcart, 2 of the older boys and Etta running ahead, and set it in the middle of the yard. Ruth knelt to it in her gray dress and took the key from around her neck, and the whole town watched her turn it in the lock. The lid came up. Out of the worn green felt she lifted the hard leather case, and out of the case the fine slim rifle, and the yard made a sound. A low sound, at the sight of it in her hands, because her hands knew it the way a hand knows a thing it has held 10,000 times. Then she reached back into the trunk and took out something small, wrapped in oiled cloth. She unwound it. It sat in her palm, hollow and clear, catching the April light, an amber glass ball, the size of a small apple. "Mr. Kerr," she said. "You've a good arm still? Good enough. Toss it high. Underhand, when I say." The crowd fell back to the fence rails without being told. Kerr took the amber ball and weighed it and moved off 20 paces. And Ruth loaded the rifle with a motion no one in that yard had ever seen a woman make, or scarce any man. She set her feet. She squared to the space where the ball would go, weight settled, elbow easy, and 40 years fell off Amos Kerr's memory, and he was a young man at the river again, watching the girl who never missed. "Now," she said. The amber ball went up, turning, a small sun climbing the gray sky. It reached the top of its arc and hung there the half-instant that all thrown things hang. The rifle spoke once. The ball burst, not fell, burst, into a bright rain of amber that came down glittering over the dried mud, and the sound of the shot rolled out over the town and off the empty prairie beyond it, and did not come back. For a moment no one made a sound at all. Then Tom Renfrew, 7 years old, in the front of the crowd, said "Oh" in a voice full of wonder, and that broke it, and the yard let out its breath all at once. The best shot in her father's show stood in a Nebraska schoolyard with the smoke curling off the barrel, and every soul in Corliss had seen it with their own eyes. Renner had gone pale. But he was not finished, because a paid man is never finished while there is paper in his coat. He held up the legal notice again, higher, very fine, he said, and his voice had a crack in it now. A grand trick. It changes nothing. She's named here, and the claim stands, and no shooting in a mud yard. Read it, Kerr said. Renner stopped. Read it out, Kerr said again. And now he came close to the man, and though he raised no hand, there was something in the old gunsmith that made Renner take half a step back. You've read the handbill loud enough. Read the paper. Read the part where your man swears his account of her. Go on. Renner did not read it. And in the not reading, the whole town saw the thing turn. I'll tell them what's in it, Kerr said, quiet now, letting the yard lean in. Because a man like you writes it all down, dates and details, to make it stick. Your man swears she's a fraud, swears she never had the skill that was on the bill, that the show was a cheat and she a cheat in it, a woman trading on a name she never earned. He looked around the ring of faces. You all just watched her earn it. Whatever that paper says she is, it's built on a lie you can see the false of with your own eyes. A man who'll swear false about the small thing to a judge, what's he sworn false about in the large? He turned back to Ruth, and his voice was almost kind. You're not hiding from a handbill, Miss Ellery. A woman hiding from a bill would have spent it long ago to fill her belly, a name that famous is money. You hid from a person. That's a different running. A woman running from a reputation can stand up and claim it and be safe. A woman running from a man can't claim anything, because the claiming is the very rope he'd pull her back by. That's why you took the worst wage in the smallest town on the line. That's why you never once said the dress was borrowed. Not because you were poor, because being small was the only door he couldn't see. The yard was silent. Ruth Ellery, Della Vance, stood with her father's rifle in her hands and did not deny a word of it, and the not denying was the truest thing she had said in 4 months. Renner looked at the town, and the town looked back at him, and he saw what every locator learns to see, which is the moment the ground goes out from under the job. His notice needed privacy to work. A quiet claim. A woman with no witnesses, no standing, no name the crowd would defend. Instead, he had a public record now. 100 sworn eyes, an old gunsmith who knew the show, and a whole county that had watched the cheap teacher become the rarest thing any of them had ever seen. He folded the paper along its old creases, slow, and put it back inside his coat. The claim's still lawful, he said, but he said it to no one, and there was no weight left in it. Then, serve it in a court, Kerr said, where a judge can weigh your man's word against 40 years of witnesses, not in a schoolyard. The depot agent'll sell you a ticket. Train's at 4. Renner went. He walked back through the gate the way he had come, without hurry, because a man like him keeps his walk even when he is lost, and the town watched him the whole 200 yards to the depot and did not offer him so much as a nod. Ruth broke the rifle open and drew the spent shell and knelt to lay the gun back in its case on the worn green felt. Etta came and knelt beside her without a word and helped her fold the oiled cloth. Tom stood at the edge of the trunk and looked down into it and then up at his aunt, who was not his aunt that anyone had been told, and he said, "Miss Ellery, will you show me how?" And something in Ruth's face came very near to breaking, and did not, and she said one day, "When you're a little bigger and a great deal steadier." And she closed the lid and turned the key and hung it back around her neck against her skin. The board met that evening in the schoolhouse, all 9, by lamplight, with the paper chains the children had made still hanging over their heads. Ruth did not come. She had not been asked to, and she would not have gone if she had. Deniston led it, because leading it was the only way left to look as though he had meant for any of this. "I'll say it plain," he began. "The woman is who the man said. She's on a handbill and she's on a legal claim, and whatever Amos Kerr's fine speech. We are a school board and we answer to the parents of this town. I move we do not renew the contract past the 1st of May. We've our children to think of." He sat back, certain of it, because he was a man who could count, and the count had always been with him. There was a silence. Then Mrs. Combe folded her hands on the table. "Horace," she said. "My Daniel could not read a lick in December. He is in the 3rd reader now. In 4 months." She let that sit, as Kerr had let his things sit. "You want to talk about the children. Let's talk about the children." Mr. Alder cleared his throat. "The Renfrew boy," he said. "Tom, come up 2 grades. His uncle told me himself, near cried telling it, a man who's buried enough not to cry easy. And the girl, Etta, she writes a fair hand now. Fairer than mine." He looked at Deniston. "I don't care what she did in a show tent 4 years back. I care that she taught my neighbor's orphaned children to read when nobody paid her extra to bother. That's the whole of what I care about." "She lied about her name," Deniston said. "She never said a word about her name," said Mrs. Combe. "We assumed the rest. We assumed she was cheap because she looked cheap. We're the ones who told the story, Horace. She only let us." It went around the table. It did not go the way Deniston had counted. When the hands came up, 7 of the 9 were for renewing, and the contract stood, the same $32 a month, the same term to the next spring, the cheapest wage on the line, paid now to the best-known woman in the county. Deniston, seeing the count turn against him, did the thing that men like Deniston do, which is to arrive quickly at the front of a parade he tried to stop. "Well," he said, gathering his coat, "I said from the first she was a rare hire. Didn't I say it? Best deal this board ever made." No one troubled to remind him what he had said. It was late, and they wanted their beds, and the woman had her school back, and that was enough. The autumn came the way autumn comes on the plains. All at once, the cottonwoods along the creek going gold in a single week, and the mornings sharp enough to see your breath in the schoolroom before the stove caught. Ruth had the stove lit before the children came, the way she had that first October, the room warm, and the spelling list on the board, and the day made ready. Little had changed that a stranger would see. The dress was still gray. The boots were the same, resoled a 3rd time now. She still walked the 2 miles, and she still kept to herself, and she still let no porter touch her trunk. But the dark blue wool dress had come down off its nail, and she wore it on Sundays, and no one thought a thing of it. And on the windowsill of the north room over the kitchen, where the morning light came in, sat a single amber glass ball. Hollow, the size of a small apple, the mate to the one she had broken in the yard, kept whole, catching the sun each morning and throwing a small warm coin of light onto the floorboards. She did not explain it, and no one asked. The rifle stayed in the trunk, locked, unneeded. She had spent it once, in front of the whole town, to prove one true thing, and it turned out once was all she had ever needed it for out here. Tom Renfrew read aloud to the class now, standing, without stumbling, and sometimes he read to the little ones the way older boys do when they've grown proud of a skill. And Ruth would sit at the back and listen to her sister's son shape the words clean, and think that she had gotten, after all, the one thing she came for, which was to be near enough to hear it. Etta stayed after some evenings to help sweep, and they did not speak of what they both now half understood, that the teacher watched these two children more closely than a teacher watches, that there was a reason she had picked this town off the whole length of the line. Some things are truer for being left unsaid. Ruth had learned that the hard way, and she was not going to unlearn it now. And here is the strange arithmetic of it, if you care to add the column the way I have. A woman hiding from a reputation could have stood up on any platform in the country and claimed her own famous name and been perfectly safe, because a name that 11,000 people cheer is a shield, not a wound. But a woman hiding from a person had to do the opposite. She had to become smaller than she was. She had to take the worst wage in the smallest town and wear a borrowed dress a size too big and let a whole county call her cheap and never once correct them, because the only place a certain kind of man cannot find you is beneath his notice. She buried the best thing she had ever been. She buried it in an iron-banded trunk and a mended pair of boots. And the joke of it, the good joke, the one that makes the whole 4 months worth telling, is that the buried thing was the very thing that finally proved who she was, when a stranger came off the train with a paper meant to make her nobody. And a whole town watched her turn a glass ball into a fall of amber rain, and understood, all at once, that they had never once looked closely enough at the quiet woman who taught their children to read. So, if you were ever weighed by someone who should have looked closer, and found light, and let them go on thinking it, you might just be carrying the very thing that proves them wrong. Keep it safe. You'll know the day to take it out. Tell me the name of your own small town in the comments. I read every one,